Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited. In this video, I'm going to show you how to install a limited slip differential into your 10-bolt Chevy rear end. Stay with me. All right, so let's talk about just for a moment, why is it important to have a limited slip differential? Well, most vehicles nowadays come with what's called an open differential that allows for a differential of speeds between the wheels, the drive wheels. Now, why would you want that? Well, in this very crudely drawn illustration here, I'll give you an example. So the vehicle, as long as it's moving straight, you can see that the path of the wheels is identical both sides. That means they're both traveling at the exact same speed. So in this case, if the rear differential were locked and both wheels were traveling at the same speeds, it'd be just fine because they have the exact same distance to travel. Now, imagine you have to go around the corner, which does tend to happen when you're driving a car. You can see that the distance that the outer wheel has to travel is very much so farther than the inside wheel. So there's a differential of speeds happening there. If this rear wheel or if this rear axle were locked going around that corner, then this inside tire would be trying to match the speed of the outside tire, and you'd essentially be doing a burnout on the inside tire all the way around. You can hear that in the car. It'll start to hop and chirp and skip around. Not something that people really want in an everyday driver. So they have what's called an open differential, which allows for that differential of tire speed so you can go around a corner smoothly and not even notice. Now, why is this a detriment? Well, because of the way in which this open differential works, if you intentionally try to put power to the ground, as in doing a burnout or you're trying to take off from a launch, the vehicle is going to put all of the power to the tire that has the least amount of grip. So if one tire starts spinning, it's going to send every bit of power to that spinning tire. That's why it'll spin really, really fast, but the other tire won't do anything. And that's obviously not what you want in any sort of a drag race application or performance application. You want the power to be going to both wheels equally. Now, limited slip differential allows you the best of both worlds. You will still have the open diff capabilities to go around corners smoothly, but when you really put the power to the ground, it will push that power out to both sides so you get power at both tires and you can get the maximum amount of traction available. So really that's the point of having a limited slip differential, and we're going to install it now on my C10. All right, so we're going to be installing a posi-track style differential in this rear end, and I think it's important before we actually install this that you have an exact understanding of how this thing works, and it can get a little bit technical. So in this case, I'm going to defer to my friend, Mr. Nunamaker.
How exactly does a posi-track rear end on a Plymouth work? It just does.
So there it is. Now you are fully aware and up to date of exactly how it is that a posi-track rear end works. Let's install it. All right, so another reason I'm doing the upgrade here, besides just the limited slip diff, is I'm changing the gear ratio because this gear ratio is 273 gearing. So it has 15 teeth on the Pinion and 41 on the ring gear. 273 gears are great for highway mileage or for keeping the RPMs down when you're going highway speeds. That's not what I'm after here. I'm after something a bit more sporty. So I'm going with a more traditional 373 gear ratio, but that means I have to replace both the Pinion and the ring gear with a new one, which this is a great time to do it because I am replacing the carrier anyway. So let's move forward with that. All right, we're gonna start it with a quick lesson on how to actually remove the carrier from the rear end, because you don't actually have to remove the entire rear axle from the vehicle to do this. So what you need to do is, there's a little bolt here. You spin the carrier around so you can gain access to this little 8mm head bolt. And once you remove this, it allows the differential pin to slide out of the housing. Now, after that slides out, you push the axles in towards the center, and these little C-clips that are in there will fall out of place. Once the C-clips fall out of place, the axles themselves can be removed completely from the carrier assembly. Now, once you've removed both of the axles, I definitely recommend that you put the differential pin back in and throw the bolt back in, because with the differential pin out of there, if you rotate the carrier, the spider gears can actually fall out of the carrier housing, and it is pretty difficult to get them back in there. So put the diff pin back into place before you go rotating the carrier. And then after the axles are removed, go ahead and pull the caps on each side and you can remove the carrier from the rear end housing. All right, in this case, I will be replacing the carrier and the ring gear and the pinion gear, all the bearings with all new components. So basically this entire thing goes in the garbage, and we're gonna start fresh over here. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install the carrier bearings on the end. Now, obviously it is best if you have a press to do this. However, it is not entirely necessary. If you can find a tube that has the exact diameter of the inside race here, okay, do not get any pressure on the outside race, but if you can find something that only has pressure on the inside race, then you can kind of pop that on with a hammer or something. But again, the best choice is always a press if you have access to one. So make sure when you're pressing this on that you can actually spin the outer race freely, so you know you don't have any pressure on this, only on the inside race. All right, so you saw there we got the carrier bearings installed on both sides. They both spin freely. Now we're going to go ahead and install the ring gear onto the carrier. Now, something to remember about this ring gear and the bolts, which I got new bolts with our kit, is that they are left-hand thread. So remember that. Left-hand thread when you're putting them on. I'm gonna put some Loctite on here, torque them down, we'll be in good shape. All right, our next step is we're going to go ahead and install the pinion bearing races into the housing. There's one in the front and one in the back side there. A good tip here is to use the old bearing race to tap in the new one, because obviously it'll be the exact same size. It'll give you something to smack onto with your plastic mallet. So the next item on our list, we're going to go ahead and install the front pinion bearing and the pinion seal. So we already installed the race, just slip the bearing in there, center it, and we'll tap the seal into place. All right, now that we've done that, the next thing we're going to do is try to establish our pinion depth. That's how far the actual pinion is sticking out of the case. So we have our new pinion gear here, our 373 gear. Now, the primary pinion bearing that goes onto this is a press fit design, and the spacers that we're using go underneath that bearing. So it's a real pain in the butt to actually press the bearing on and pull it off every time we're trying to change out our spacers on there to get our correct pinion depth. So a good trick is to remove the original pinion bearing from your original pinion, use a carbide and grind out the center of it until it's a slip fit and just drops right on down. This way you can install and uninstall this as many times as necessary to get the proper spacing before you install the actual bearing. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinstall the original spacer that was underneath the pinion bearing. We're going to start with that and see how close we are. So your standard 8.5 inch rebuilt kit will come with one of these crush sleeves. As you tighten the nut down for the pinion, it'll crush until you get to the proper preload, and then that's set. However, it's kind of tricky because it's a one-shot deal. You either get it, tighten it down in increments until you get it just right, and that's where it sits. Or what you do is you replace it with a crush sleeve eliminator kit. So it basically comes with a sleeve and a bunch of different washers or spacers, really thin spacers, and then you can test them and go in and out several times until you actually find the correct preload. And that's a really nice feature because the crush sleeves, if you don't get it right the first time, you're kind of done for. So I went ahead and swapped over to this crush sleeve eliminator set, and we're going to use that in conjunction with setting our pinion depth right now. All right, so the metric that we're looking for here is turning torque. And what that means is as you turn this thing smoothly, you should have a gauge of some sort to where you can read what the inch-pound reading is. Now the spec on this is between 14 and 19 inch-pounds. What you wanna do as well is you wanna make sure you spin this thing in both directions before you begin your measurement, because otherwise it could be bound up by something in there. So spin it both ways, go ahead and make sure the bearings are fully seated in there, and then use your indicator to set it. Now, you should have one that has the actual dial on the back of it. Those are much more accurate. In this case, I just have the the pin type here, which isn't nearly that accurate, but I'm fairly confident that I should be able to feel how much resistance I should have. I've done this a few times before, so I kind of know a good sense of what it should feel like. So let's go ahead and see what our measurement is. All right, I think we are there. And keep in mind that 14 and 19 inch-pounds of resistance, that is for new bearings when you put them in there. If you're reusing the originals, your numbers are going to be different, so you have to look those up. But 14 and 19 inch-pounds turning torque resistance, and again, this is just with the pinion installed, not with the carrier installed. All right, so we've got our pinion installed here. Again, it's not for the final time, but we have it in. Our turning torque is correct, so I know my spacers for the crush sleeve eliminator are good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and install the carrier in here, try to get that set up a little bit. That way I can check the pattern of the pinion versus the ring gear. All right, so I went ahead and just chose some random spacers just to get me somewhere in the ballpark on each side. I went ahead and slipped the carrier assembly in there, and I've got the main caps back on. We're gonna go ahead and torque these things down to the proper spec. Don't worry, you're gonna have this thing in and out quite a few different times while you figure out your spacing. But what we wanna do first is I wanna get this thing locked in here, tightened down, and then I wanna measure my turning torque again and see if that is within spec. If it's not, then I'm gonna continue to add some spacers. On either side, doesn't really matter. I'm gonna add some spacers until I achieve the proper turning torque. And then you're gonna set your backlash after that, which is how close the ring gear is to the pinion. So you're gonna move it left or right based on that. If it's too loose, you wanna move it closer to the pinion. If it's too tight, you wanna move it further away. But at that point, because your turning torque is correct, you know that your spacers are going to be the right size. So at that point, you're just transferring spacers from one side to the other to achieve your proper backlash. All right, so the torque down is 60 foot-pounds. We definitely have some backlash there. Let's go ahead and measure the turning torque. All right, so I've got the caps torqued down. I have my spacers in place. Now we can just put in an initial feel for the backlash. So I don't have my dial indicator just yet. I'm gonna set it up here in just a moment, but to me, that sounds like there's a little bit too much backlash happening there. So I'm gonna go ahead and move one of the shims from this side to this side, one of the very thin ones. That way I can bring it closer to the pinion itself, and then we'll retest it again with a dial indicator. All right, so I went ahead and shifted around the shims a little bit, and you can see here, backlash is right about 15 thousandths, which is quite a bit too much, so we still need to shift a few more shims. So I'll go one more, and we'll try this again. All right, so we set it up again, moved one shim. Right now you can see we got right about 7 to 8 thousandths of backlash. The spec is 6 to 10, so we are dead on there. Now I'm gonna go ahead and check the pattern on the teeth. Just gonna put some happy yellow paint on the teeth here. That way they can be with their friends. Now we're gonna go ahead and spin this through a couple of cycles, maybe go back and forth with it, and then we're gonna try to see where our marks are, if they're centered in there or if they're too far off to one edge or the other. All right, so taking a look at our pattern here. Yeah, it's gonna be kind of tough to tell on camera, but there you go. So you can kind of see that it's more towards the front edge of the teeth. And then if you look on the back side here, yeah, we definitely want it a little bit more centered than that. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a shim to the pinion depth to bring it out just a little bit more. And then we'll have to reset everything up. That's kind of what this is. It's a trial and error, and you just gotta keep trying again and again until you get the setup right. All right, I brought the pinion out just a little bit more. Went ahead and reset everything up, checked my backlash, we're all good. So let's go ahead and check this pattern again. All right, after a bunch of switching things around, I think I've got a pretty decent pattern going on here. There you go. Kind of see there. And there. There you go. So we're all set up now. We've got our pinion preload set correctly. We have our carrier preload set correctly. We have our backlash set correctly. So now it is just time to take it all back apart, press on our new pinion bearing, reassemble everything, and reassemble the axle itself. All right, there it is, guys. We have our limited slip differential installed here. I'm really happy with the pinion bearing preload that I have. The backlash is within spec, and our gear pattern looks to be in good shape as well. So the next step here is to put the backing plates back on, slip the axles back into place, put the C-clips back on, put the drums back on, and then we can put this right back underneath the truck again. So I hope you guys learned something today. It was nice for me. I don't do differential stuff all that often, so it was kind of nice to get back into the flow of things, kind of go over some information I'd had before. This is just another area where, again, you gotta take your time, just go slow and do it right, because the worst thing is to slap it back together again, think, it's pretty close, and then you drive it and it's not. It ends up making some noise on you. So you don't wanna do that. Really take your time, try to do it the correct way first. Even if you have to take it apart and put it back together several times on the bench, that's okay. Or even if you're doing it underneath the vehicle. So anyway, I hope you guys learned something today, and if you would like to, go ahead and consider subscribing to the channel. I have all sorts of automotive content. In fact, there's gonna be videos popping up all over the place with more automotive content. I try to go as in-depth as I can without being too over the top with it. So again, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. We'll see you next time on Reignited.